He's a millionaire CEO with everything except connection. One cold evening in the heart of Chicago, Matthew Grant steps onto a subway platform after another long day of boardroom battles and silence echoing through his penthouse. But tonight, something changes. A boy's voice cuts through the noise. Soft, haunting, and strangely familiar. He's singing a lullaby. Not just any lullaby, but the one Matthew's mother wrote when he was just a boy. A song never published, never shared. Matthew freezes. How does this child know that melody? As the song ends, the boy looks up. His name is Leo. Next to him stands his twin brother, and in Leo's hand, a wrinkled piece of paper with lyrics only one woman on earth could have known, Matthew's first love. The deeper Matthew digs, the more tangled the past becomes. Lost love, secrets, and two boys singing not just for money, but for their mother, who's running out of time. Now, Matthew must confront the ghosts he left behind and decide what kind of father and man he wants to be. But not everyone wants him back in their lives. What happens when truth, love, and legacy collide beneath a subway platform? Stick around to find out. This is a story that will pull at your heartstrings, one note at a time. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a story that could change the way you see family. Forever. Matthew Grant stood by the tall window of his penthouse suite, sipping a glass of aged bourbon that had lost its warmth long ago. The city lights of Chicago flickered below like the restless memories in his mind. At 48, he was the face behind Harmonia Soundworks, a multi-billion-dollar empire that crafted some of the world's finest audio equipment. But tonight, the silence in his suite was deafening. He pulled on his coat and scarf, more out of habit than necessity. The air was biting, but it was the only thing that made him feel real. He needed space, or maybe noise. Maybe the chaos of the city could drown the thoughts he couldn't escape. The streets buzzed with late commuters and neon lights. His driver had already gone home, so he walked. 15 minutes later, he descended the stairs into the Roosevelt subway station. The platform was nearly empty. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Then, just as he was about to pass the last column and head toward the tracks, it happened. A voice. A boy's voice. Raw, tender, untrained, but hauntingly beautiful. Matthew stopped mid-step, his breath catching. He couldn't move, not yet. The boy was sitting cross-legged on a worn blanket by the far wall. A small, portable speaker played soft chords in the background. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the mic connected to the speaker. A second boy, who looked almost exactly like him, sat beside him with a small box for donations. But it wasn't their faces that held Matthew in place. It was the song. Those lyrics, that melody. It was impossible. Matthew's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped closer, every word hitting him like a memory he thought he'd buried. His mother used to sing that song to him when he was a boy, late at night, in the cold winters of Evanston. She called it Leo's Lullaby. But the song was never recorded, never published. She wrote it by hand, just for him. And she died before he ever got the chance to share it with the world. The boy sang the final note, voice breaking softly. A long silence followed. Someone tossed $1 into the box, then another, but Matthew stood still. "Where did you learn that song?" he finally asked, his voice dry and low. The boys looked up, startled. The one who had sung stood slowly. "Our mom taught it to us," he said. "She used to sing it when she was still strong enough to hold a tune." "What's your name?" Matthew asked, almost pleading. "I'm Leo," the boy replied. "That's my brother, Noah." Leo, The same name. Matthew's breath caught in his throat. "Your mother," he said carefully. Does she know someone named Matthew Grant?" Leo looked at his brother. Then he reached into the backpack beside him and pulled out a folded, worn piece of paper. "She gave us this," he said, handing it over. Matthew unfolded it slowly. His hands trembled as he smoothed out the creases. It was her handwriting, the lyrics, the lullaby. And, scrawled in the corner, in faded ink, were the words, "To Matthew, always yours. Natalie." Matthew staggered back a step. Natalie. He hadn't heard her name in over 10 years. "She said it came from someone she once loved," Leo added softly. "Said it was a gift, a memory, something too precious to forget." Matthew couldn't find words. His eyes stung. The cold air around him felt suddenly heavy. He looked at the boys again, their hair, their eyes, the tilt of their chin, all vaguely familiar. Is she okay?" Leo hesitated. "She's sick," he said. "Real sick. We're trying to raise money for her medicine, but it's not going great." Matthew nodded slowly, silently. His world, which had been so carefully ordered and distant, had just shattered with a single song. He looked at the folded paper in his hand, then back at the boys. And something inside him, something buried, stirred again. "Where do you live?" he asked quietly. Leo didn't answer right away. He studied Matthew's face as if trying to figure out whether he was someone they could trust. "We stay with our mom," Leo finally said, "in a small apartment near Ashland and 18th. When she's not too tired." Matthew gently placed a $100 bill in their box. "I'd like to see her," he said, "if that's okay." Noah looked up for the first time. His voice was quiet but firm. "Only if you're not here to hurt her again." Matthew swallowed hard. "I'm not." He meant it, and he would prove it, even if it broke him. Matthew couldn't sleep that night. Even with the city skyline blinking outside his penthouse window and the soothing hum of white noise filling the space, his thoughts kept circling back to the subway, to Leo's voice, to the faded handwriting on the note. Natalie, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in over a decade, now suddenly alive on his lips again. He remembered the warmth of her laugh, the way she used to hum when she cooked, the old upright piano in her studio apartment where she played that lullaby. It had been more than just a song. It had been a promise. And now, it lived in the voice of a boy who looked far too much like him. The next morning, Matthew canceled his meetings. His assistant, Darla, protested. "Matthew, the Tokyo licensing team has been waiting for weeks. You can't just—" "I said cancel them," he said gently but firmly. "I have something more important to do." There was a pause on the line, then a sigh. "Yes, sir, I'll handle it." Matthew pulled on a black wool coat and tucked the worn piece of paper into his inner pocket. Then he stepped into the chilled Chicago air, hailing a cab instead of using his town car. He needed to do this without the weight of his name following him. The ride to Ashland and 18th was quiet. The neighborhood was rougher than he remembered. Boarded windows, cracked sidewalks, a corner store with flickering lights, and 2 men huddled near a space heater out front. He walked past them and found the address Leo had given. A red brick building, 3 stories, faded paint on the railings, a mailbox labeled N. Rivera, apt 2B. His heart thudded as he climbed the stairs. He paused before knocking. What was he even going to say? "Hey, Natalie, sorry I disappeared. I didn't know we had children together, but I heard our lullaby in the subway and now I'm here to make it right." It sounded ridiculous in his head. Still, he knocked. A long silence followed. Then, a tired voice from inside. "Who is it?" He took a breath. "It's Matthew." There was another pause, then slow footsteps. The door opened just a crack. A chain held it in place. He saw her, Natalie. Older, paler, her dark hair streaked with gray and pulled back in a loose bun. But her eyes, those deep, gentle eyes, hadn't changed. She blinked in disbelief. "Matthew?" He nodded. She looked at him for a long moment, then quietly unlatched the door. "I wasn't sure if I'd ever see you again," she said, voice low. "I didn't expect to see you like this," he replied softly. Natalie stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was small but clean. A blanket was folded on the worn couch. A keyboard sat in the corner, dusty but clearly loved. The boys weren't there. "They're at the clinic," she said, as if reading his mind, "getting vitamins. The food pantry gives out vouchers sometimes." He sat down slowly. "I heard Leo singing," he said, "in the subway." She smiled faintly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "He loves that song. Always has. I told them it came from someone special, someone who used to believe in me." He pulled the note from his pocket and placed it gently on the coffee table. Her breath caught. "I didn't think you'd still have that," she whispered. "I didn't. Leo did." Her eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them back. "I tried to find you once," she admitted, "years ago, but your secretary said you were out of the country, and I figured maybe you'd moved on." Matthew looked down, guilt washing over him. "I didn't know. About them. About you. I was young and stupid and chasing success like it would fix the hole in me." Natalie gave a tired laugh. "Did it?" He shook his head slowly. "No, it just made the hole quieter." They sat in silence for a while. Then she spoke again, softly. "They don't know. Not really. I didn't want to confuse them unless you were ready." "I want to be," he said. "I don't know how, but I want to try." She studied his face. "They're good boys," she said. "Kind. Brave. They've had to grow up fast. If you come in and out of their lives, it'll hurt them more than it helps. I'm not going to disappear again," he said gently. A soft knock came at the door. Natalie rose to open it. Leo and Noah stepped in, their cheeks red from the cold, their arms full of paper bags. When they saw Matthew, they paused. Natalie smiled at them. "Boys," she said, her voice tender, "this is Matthew. He's an old friend." Leo glanced at Noah. "Mom, he's the guy from the subway," Leo whispered. Matthew stood slowly. He looked at them, at their faces, at the years he'd missed. And he said quietly but clearly, "I'm here because of that song, but I'm staying because of you." Leo and Noah shuffled into the small apartment, setting down their bags carefully. The air was filled with the soft rustle of paper and the quiet thud of canned goods on the counter. Matthew stood awkwardly near the doorway, unsure of his place in this space. He wasn't used to feeling small in a room, but something about being here, in this modest apartment, with these two boys and the woman he once loved, stripped away his usual confidence. Natalie offered him tea. He nodded, grateful for the excuse to sit. The boys glanced at him curiously as they unpacked a small bag of instant noodles, peanut butter, and vitamins. "So," Leo said after a beat, "you're the guy who gave Mom the song?" Matthew looked up, startled. Natalie smiled gently. "I told them it came from someone special." Matthew cleared his throat. "Your mom and we were very close once. That lullaby was something I wrote with her a long time ago." Leo seemed to accept that, though his eyes searched Matthew's face for something he couldn't quite name. Noah, the quieter of the two, suddenly asked, "Why'd you stop being close?" The question landed like a stone in the middle of the room. Matthew looked at Natalie. She nodded slightly. "Go on." "I was scared," he admitted. "I was younger. My family. They didn't approve of a lot of things, and instead of standing up, I ran." Noah just nodded. There was no judgment, only the quiet acceptance of someone who had already learned that adults didn't always get it right. Natalie handed Matthew a chipped mug of tea, then sat beside the boys on the couch. "They've been through a lot this year," she said softly. "Their school lost its arts funding. Leo sings wherever he can. I teach piano from home, when my hands let me." Matthew's brows furrowed. "Your hands?" She hesitated, then flexed her fingers. "Arthritis. It's been getting worse. Some days I can't play at all." He felt something tighten in his chest. The thought of Natalie unable to play, of those boys being cut off from music. "I can help," he said quickly. She looked at him. "Matthew." "Not because I pity you," he added, gently but firmly. "Because I owe you more than I can ever say, and because those boys—" He glanced at Leo and Noah. "They brought something back to me I thought I lost forever." Natalie's eyes glistened. She looked down at her tea, and for a long moment said nothing. Then Leo spoke up, surprising them both. "Mom said the song was called Echoes of Us, but I added a second verse. Want to hear it?" Matthew smiled genuinely. "I'd love that." Leo crossed the room, sat at the small keyboard, and began to play. The melody was a little rough, but recognizable. It was the same lullaby that had stopped Matthew in his tracks the night before. Only now it had grown. The new verse was simple, hopeful, something about bridges not burned and voices found again. Leo's voice cracked slightly on one note, and Noah joined him from the couch, harmonizing in that soft way twins often do without needing to plan. Matthew closed his eyes. His mother had written the original chorus. Natalie had given it color, and now their children had given it a future. When the last note faded, the room was quiet. "I want to support your music," Matthew said quietly. "Not just with words. I have an academy, in the city, with real instructors, scholarships, equipment. It's yours, if you'll take it." Natalie's eyes widened. "I can't accept—" "You can," he interrupted softly, "because it's not a handout. It's a way forward, for all of us." She looked at her boys, then at Matthew. Her voice trembled. "Promise me one thing." "Anything," he said. "Don't walk away again." Matthew nodded. Slowly, sincerely. "I won't." Noah leaned toward his mom and whispered something. Natalie hesitated, then nodded. "'Kay," she said softly. "You can tell him." Noah turned to Matthew. "Mom has a box, from a long time ago, with pictures and a letter." Matthew blinked. "A letter?" Natalie rose, walked to the hallway closet, and returned with a small, worn shoebox. Inside, photos yellowed with age, concert ticket stubs, and, at the very bottom, a folded envelope with Matthew's name on it in familiar handwriting. He opened it with trembling fingers. It was his own mother's handwriting. To Matthew, if you ever find your way back to Natalie, know this lullaby was never meant to be a goodbye. It was my hope that someday it would bring you home. He read the line twice, then lowered the letter and whispered, "I think it just did." Matthew held the letter as if it were made of glass, his thumb brushing across the familiar loops in his mother's handwriting. The apartment was silent. Even the boys, usually energetic, sat, still, watching his face for some reaction they didn't quite understand. Natalie placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "She wrote it the day before she left town. I never had the courage to mail it back." Matthew's voice cracked softly. This was her voice. Even after all these years, it sounds just like her. He read the words again, this time aloud. This lullaby was never meant to be a goodbye. It was my hope it would bring you home. Leo looked at Noah. That's why the song felt like it belonged to us. Noah nodded solemnly, because maybe it always did. Matthew folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. Then he looked up at Natalie. I wasn't ready back then, but I am now, if you'll let me. I want to be part of their lives, of yours. Natalie hesitated. Her eyes searched his, as if trying to believe what her heart was already telling her. I want that too, she whispered, but we need to take this slow, for the boys, and for me. Matthew nodded. Slow is fine, as long as we're moving forward. That evening, he didn't go back to his penthouse. Instead, he stayed. They ordered takeout, cheap noodles, egg rolls, and warm tea. The boys told him about school, about the songs they made up on the train, and about the small keyboard that only played half the notes anymore. I'll get you a new one, Matthew offered. Leo tilted his head. Can we pick it out with you? Like, at a store? Together? Matthew smiled. Yeah, together. The next morning, they rode the subway back into the city. This time, it wasn't cold or lonely. The boys sat beside him, one on each side, their heads leaning into his arms. Natalie followed, still unsure, but quietly hopeful. At Brooks Audio, Matthew's company, they stepped into a room filled with polished pianos, string instruments, and soundproof walls lined with history. The receptionist's jaw nearly dropped when she saw Matthew walk in, with kids. He turned to Natalie. I want them to meet someone. In the next room, an older man with wiry gray hair adjusted a mic stand. Jerry, Matthew called out, I've got 2 new artists for you. The man turned, his face lighting up. They yours? Matthew looked at Leo and Noah. In the ways that matter. Yeah. Jerry shook the boys' hands warmly. Well, I can already tell you've got music in your blood. Leo looked around, wide-eyed. This place smells like old songs. Everyone chuckled. Matthew led Natalie to a corner of the studio where a sleek grand piano gleamed under the soft light. I bought this piano 20 years ago, he said softly, with my first royalty check. I called it Hope. Thought I'd use it to write the soundtrack to the life I wanted. She glanced at him. Did you ever write that soundtrack? He looked over at the boys. I think I just found the melody. Later that afternoon, as the twins played chords and giggled with Jerry, Matthew sat with his leadership team in the conference room upstairs. It was supposed to be a routine check-in, until the whispers began. One executive glanced at the others. You've been distracted lately, Matt. Another chimed in. Bringing children to the studio? Using company funds for community scholarships without board approval? Matthew stayed calm. They're not just children. They're part of our future. And this company started because of a single song. Now that song lives on. A third board member leaned forward. We understand your passion, but investors are nervous, are you? Matthew looked him straight in the eye. No, I'm finally awake. The meeting ended with murmurs and skeptical glances, but Matthew didn't flinch. He returned to the studio, where Leo was showing Noah how to record a harmony. Natalie stood near the door, watching quietly. Are they giving you trouble? She asked gently. He nodded. Some, but I'm not backing down. She walked up beside him. You're not the same man I knew. He turned toward her. I hope I'm not, because that man ran from everything that mattered. Natalie reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. It was old, worn. The edges curled. You left this behind once, she said, handing it to him. It was a picture of the two of them, younger, happier, standing in front of a college music hall. His arm was around her, her eyes filled with laughter. I kept it, she said softly, because I thought, maybe one day you'd come back." Matthew looked at the photo, then at her, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm back now, and I'm not leaving." The sun filtered through the wide windows of the studio the next morning. Warm light spilled across the glossy black piano where Leo and Noah now sat. One boy played softly, hesitantly. The other listened, nodding along with the beat. Matthew watched from the side, arms crossed, his heart thudding with something unfamiliar. Not nervousness, not regret. Something closer to joy. Real, grounded joy. Natalie entered with 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one and leaned against the wall beside him. "They've never had this kind of space," she said quietly. "A place that listens when they speak. A piano that answers when they play." Matthew took a sip and smiled. Well, maybe it's time they did. But before the moment could linger too long, his phone buzzed. It was Simon, his chief operating officer, Simon. "Matt, we've got a situation. The board wants an emergency vote on your discretionary spending. Some of the scholarships, the studio time, you've raised eyebrows. And the kids, they're asking questions." Matthew's jaw clenched. "Schedule the meeting. I'll be there." He hung up, the smile fading. Natalie caught his expression. "Let me guess, they don't like that your heart finally showed up to work." Matthew chuckled softly, but there was a bitter edge to it. Something like that. "Do you need me to talk to them?" she asked gently, but with resolve. "To explain what this really means?" He shook his head. "No. If I'm going to fight for this, I need to do it myself. They need to hear it from me." That evening, the twins sat across from Matthew at a booth in a corner diner. Plates of fries and grilled cheese sat half-eaten between them. The boys were unusually quiet. Matthew leaned forward. "You okay?" Leo glanced at Noah, then back. "Are we causing trouble?" Matthew froze. "Who told you that?" "Nobody," Noah replied softly. We hear things. Mom's worried. You looked upset earlier." Matthew reached across the table, his voice low and firm. "Listen to me. You are not trouble. You're not a problem to fix or a distraction to hide. You're a reason." Leo blinked. "A reason for what?" Matthew smiled, his eyes soft. "To do things differently. To remember what matters. And to fight for it." Noah looked at him, then asked the question that had been sitting quietly in both boys' hearts. "Are you our dad?" The air seemed to stop. Matthew exhaled slowly. "I think I am. And if you'll let me, I want to be." Leo leaned into his shoulder without a word. Noah, a moment later, followed. When they left the diner, the city lights reflected off the wet pavement. Rain had started while they were inside. Matthew took off his coat and held it over the boys' heads as they ran back to the car, laughing. The next day, the boardroom was cold in every sense of the word. Leather chairs lined a long glass table. The executives sat in practiced silence, eyes sharp, voices even sharper. Simon stood by the screen, ready to present the financials, but Matthew raised a hand. "I'll speak first." He walked to the front of the room, hands clasped behind his back. "I know some of you are upset," he began. "You think I've lost focus, that my decisions lately are too personal." He paused, then added, "You're right." A murmur moved through the room. "But let me be clear. This company was born out of something deeply personal. My mother's songs, her voice, her hope. That's what built Brooks Audio." He took out the handwritten lullaby. This song, this one, was never released, never sold. But 2 boys found it, played it in a subway station, and reminded me who I am. He looked around the room. "You think I'm distracted? I think I finally remembered why I started this in the first place. If you can't see the value in investing in the future, real, living, breathing talent, then maybe it's not me who lost the plot." Silence. Then, from the corner, one voice spoke. Elaine, the youngest member on the board. What do you need from us? Matthew didn't miss a beat. Support, not just money. Belief. Space for these kids to grow. Scholarships. Mentorship. Not charity. Opportunity. Elaine nodded. I'm in. One by one, the room shifted. Some reluctant, some enthusiastic, but the tide was changing. Later that night, Matthew returned to Natalie's apartment. She was sitting at the small table helping the boys with homework. How'd it go? She asked, eyes searching. He knelt beside the boys. Well, I think we've got a studio, and maybe a future. Leo grinned. Does that mean we can write a real song? Matthew smiled, eyes brimming. No, it means you will. The weeks that followed moved like a quiet storm. Calm on the surface, but so much shifting underneath. Matthew found himself in unfamiliar territory, not in business meetings or boardrooms, but in music classes, school drop-offs, and late-night piano sessions. The boys were thriving. Leo had a natural ear, catching melodies on the fly and playing them back almost perfectly. Noah, more methodical, was discovering his strength in writing lyrics. Simple, honest phrases that carried more weight than many of the songs Matthew's company had produced in years. Natalie had begun to soften, too. She was still cautious, still protective. But Matthew could feel her slowly letting him in. She no longer stood behind the door when he arrived. She waited by the window. Sometimes she smiled. One afternoon, as rain tapped gently against the glass of her apartment, Natalie sat on the edge of the worn couch while the boys did homework. Matthew sat beside her, a quiet question resting on his heart. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, voice low. She looked down at her hands. I tried. At first, but your assistant always blocked my calls. After that, I figured you'd moved on. I didn't, he said softly. Not really. She turned to him. It's not just about us, it's about them. I didn't want them to grow up thinking they were someone's secret. So I raised them to believe they were enough on their own. Matthew blinked, the truth hitting him harder than he expected. You did a good job. She looked away, her voice cracking just slightly. Yeah, but it's getting harder. He nodded. Then let me help. That night, as Matthew drove home, he made a call to his legal advisor. I want to set up a trust, not flashy, just something steady, for Leo and Noah, and, if Natalie agrees, a medical fund. I want her to have access to the best care. The advisor hesitated. Are you ready to make this official? Matthew stared out the windshield, raindrops streaking past neon lights. I've never been more sure of anything. The next morning, he returned to the subway station, the place where it all started. This time, he brought a team, audio engineers, lighting technicians, a small film crew. What are we doing? Leo asked, wide-eyed. Matthew crouched beside him. You're going to sing, and this time, the whole world is going to listen. Noah clutched his notebook. Even the song about Mom? Matthew nodded gently, especially that one. The crowd started small, just a few commuters who slowed their step, then stopped. But word spread. Cameras rolled, phones came out. Then, Leo began to sing. His voice, still young but steady, filled the tunnel with something pure, something real. Noah stood beside him, reciting the lyrics he'd written, paper trembling slightly in his hands. Matthew stood behind them, silent, humbled. His chest ached in the best way possible. Natalie arrived halfway through. She didn't say a word, just slipped beside Matthew and let her hand rest in his. He didn't look at her, but he squeezed gently. By the end of the performance, people were crying, applauding. One man whispered, "That's the most honest thing I've heard in years." Back at the apartment, the twins sat cross-legged on the floor, reliving every second of their first public performance. "We sounded okay, right?" Leo asked. Matthew smiled, leaning against the doorway. "You didn't sound okay. You sounded unforgettable." Natalie walked in, her hand still in a brace from lingering nerve pain. She watched the boys with quiet pride, then turned to Matthew. "There's something I haven't told them," she said, voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "Let's tell them together." She took a deep breath and called them over. The boys sat across from them, sensing the shift in tone. "I've been sick for a while," Natalie began. "It's why I haven't been able to work as much. Some days are harder than others." Leo's eyes widened. "Like, sick?" She hesitated. "Not the kind that goes away with medicine, but I'm fighting. And your dad—" Matthew placed a hand over hers. "We're fighting together now." Noah frowned. "Does that mean you're staying?" Matthew looked them both in the eyes. "I'm not just staying. I'm building a life with you, if you'll let me." Leo stood and walked over, wrapping his arms around Matthew's waist. Noah joined, clutching tighter than he ever had. Natalie's eyes filled with tears. She didn't wipe them away. That night, for the first time in years, the apartment felt whole. It wasn't about the furniture or the lighting. It was about the people, the music, the quiet promises being made. As Matthew tucked the boys into bed, Leo whispered, "Will you be here tomorrow?" Matthew kissed his forehead gently. "I'll be here every tomorrow, son." The word hung in the air like a final note of a song, not just a word, a beginning. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended calm. It was the kind of quiet that comes right before something shifts forever. Matthew stayed close. Not just for the boys, for Natalie, too. He brought her to appointments, sat beside her through long tests, and held her hand when the doctor spoke in cautious tones. There was no cure, but there were options. Natalie listened quietly, nodding. She was strong, stronger than he remembered, yet there were moments, just brief flickers, where she'd close her eyes a second longer, where her grip would tighten. One afternoon, as they waited for the boys to come home from school, Natalie sat at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of untouched tea. The silence between them stretched. "I never imagined this," she said softly. Matthew leaned against the counter, arms folded. "What part?" "This. You, here, like this." He stepped closer. "I didn't either, but I don't want to waste what we've been given." She looked up, her eyes tired but clear. "Then there's something I need you to hear." From a small drawer she pulled out a dusty voice recorder, the kind they used before phones did everything. "I recorded something years ago," she said, "back when the boys were barely walking. I used to sing them the lullaby your mom taught me, the one we wrote together." She pressed play. The sound crackled at first. Then her voice filled the room, younger, vibrant, filled with a tender strength. "Sleep, little stars, don't chase the dawn. The night will hold you till fear is gone." Matthew closed his eyes. He hadn't heard that melody in years, not since the last time his mother sang it. Hearing it now, through Natalie's voice, wrapped around a memory of love and pain, undid him. "She sang that to me the night before she died," he whispered. Natalie reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "It was her gift to you, and now it's ours to pass on." That night, as the boys got ready for bed, Matthew asked, "Can we sing something together?" Leo lit up instantly. "Can it be the subway song?" "Not tonight," Matthew smiled gently. "This one's a little older, but I think you'll know it." As they sang, Leo picking up the melody, Noah finding the rhythm, Natalie leaned in the doorway, arms folded over her chest, eyes shining. It was more than a lullaby. It was a thread, connecting past to present, pain to promise. Later, after the boys had fallen asleep, Natalie turned to Matthew. "I want to record it," she said, "professionally, with the boys." He nodded slowly. "We'll make it happen." But there was something else brewing beneath her words, a quiet urgency. The next morning, Matthew called his studio's lead producer. "I need time, space, and your best team," he said. "We're cutting a track that means more than any chart number." Within 48 hours, they were in a warm, softly lit recording booth. Natalie sat on a stool, headphones over her ears. Leo stood beside her, clutching the mic with both hands. Noah had his lyrics on a stand, even though he'd already memorized every word. The red light blinked. The music began. And together, their voices rose. A family harmony, imperfect and real. There were moments Natalie's breath caught, where Leo's voice cracked, where Noah looked over, seeking reassurance. But they didn't stop. Matthew stood behind the glass, watching, heart pounding with something he couldn't name. Pride, regret, hope, all at once. When the final note faded, no one moved. Then the sound engineer whispered, "We got it." Outside the booth, Natalie turned to Matthew. "I want them to have this, in case I'm not there to sing it someday." He stepped forward, voice tight. "You'll be there." But she just smiled gently. "It's not about me anymore. It's about them knowing where they come from and who they are." As they left the studio, the city lights stretched wide ahead of them. Natalie walked slower than usual, but she didn't lean on him. She held her own weight, just like she always had. And Matthew walked beside her. No longer chasing the past, but building the future, one note at a time. The song went viral. Within days of posting the studio video online, it spread like wildfire. People weren't just listening, they were feeling. Thousands of comments poured in, stories from strangers who said the lullaby reminded them of their mothers, of lost time, of hope. One comment read, "I don't know this family, but I'd fight for them like they're my own." Matthew read that one twice. But with the light came the shadows. Not everyone saw a sweet family story. Some saw opportunity, or worse, leverage. It started with a knock. Natalie was folding laundry when she opened the door. A woman in a sharp suit stood there, flanked by a man with a clipboard. "We're from the Department of Family Services," the woman said. "We received a concern regarding the boys' living arrangements and medical supervision." Natalie's hands clenched around a sock. "From who?" "I'm afraid that's confidential." Matthew arrived 15 minutes later, breathless. He'd been across town in a meeting, but one call from Natalie sent him rushing. She stood in the kitchen, her face pale, a letter in her hand. "My sister," she whispered. She filed the complaint. Matthew's eyes narrowed. "Elaine? She thinks I'm not fit to care for the boys. Not with my health. She's been against me raising them alone since day one. Now that you're back in the picture, she's worried she's losing control." Matthew read the document. It was official. A custody hearing had been set. 2 weeks from now, Elaine was filing for joint custody, claiming Natalie's condition made her unstable and that the boys needed a more secure home environment. Matthew exhaled slowly. "She doesn't even know them." "She knows enough to twist the truth," Natalie said bitterly. The next days were tense. Meetings with lawyers, gathering medical records, letters from teachers and neighbors. Matthew used every connection he had, not to win, but to protect. One evening, he sat with the twins on the floor, building a puzzle of the Chicago skyline. Leo asked quietly, "What's a custody hearing?" Matthew paused. "It's a meeting with a judge, to make sure everyone in your life is doing what's best for you." "Do we get to talk?" Noah asked. "You might," Matthew said gently. "Only if you want to." Leo nodded. "Then I want to tell the judge that we finally feel safe." Those words haunted Matthew all night. The hearing came faster than anyone expected. It was held in a small, wood-paneled courtroom downtown. Natalie wore a simple blue dress. The boys were with a counselor in the next room, drawing pictures and answering questions. Elaine sat across from them, her posture rigid, her tone clipped. She spoke about concern, about consistency, about Natalie's condition and Matthew's late reappearance. The judge listened, calm and reserved. Then it was Natalie's turn. She stood slowly, her voice steady but soft. "I've made mistakes," she said. "I've been tired. I've had days when getting out of bed felt like a marathon. But I've never, not once, failed to love my sons. I've never let them go hungry. I've never made them feel like a burden." Elaine shifted in her seat, but Natalie didn't flinch. "I asked for help when I needed it. And when Matthew came back into our lives, I didn't push him away. I let him in. For them." She turned slightly, meeting the judge's eyes. "I don't need to be perfect. I just need to be present, and I always have been." Then Matthew stood. He didn't talk about his wealth or his company. He talked about music, about the subway, about the first time he heard his mother's song coming from a voice he didn't know, but somehow already loved. "I didn't plan for this," he said, "but now that I'm here, I'm not walking away." The judge looked down at a drawing one of the boys had submitted. Crayon figures, labeled carefully. Mom, Dad, Leo, Noah, 4 people holding hands under a sky full of stars. "Thank you," the judge said, clearing her throat. "I'll review everything and deliver my decision soon." Outside the courtroom, Natalie leaned against the wall, exhausted. Matthew stood beside her, his arm gently around her shoulders. "I don't know what'll happen," she whispered. He looked at her, quiet and certain. "Whatever it is, we face it together." She nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. That night, back at home, Leo curled up beside Matthew on the couch. "Did we do okay?" Matthew kissed the top of his head. "You did better than okay." The quiet lingered a moment longer, then Noah added from across the room, "Next time, can we bring the judge cookies?" Matthew laughed softly. "We'll see." But deep down, he knew. Their story was far from over, and no matter what the papers said, this was already a family. The judge's decision didn't come for another week. It felt like the longest 7 days of their lives. Every morning, Natalie would check the mailbox. Every evening, Matthew refreshed his inbox and kept his phone within reach. The boys, sensing the tension, stuck closer than usual. There were more hugs, more bedtime stories, more whispered questions like, "Will we all still be together next week?" Matthew always answered the same way. "Yes, we will, no matter what." Finally, the envelope came. Plain, official, heavy. Natalie held it for a long time without opening it. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed it to Matthew. "You read it." He nodded and opened it slowly, carefully, like the words might break apart if handled too fast. As he read, his face didn't change. Just a slow breath. Then he looked up. "She ruled in our favor," he said gently. "Full guardianship remains with you, and I've been granted legal rights as their father, joint responsibility, equal voice." Natalie exhaled, her knees almost giving out. Matthew caught her, held her tight. "It's over," she whispered. He shook his head. "It's just beginning." The boys ran in moments later, sensing the shift in energy. Natalie bent down to their level. "You're staying with us," she said. "No more court, no more scary letters." Leo whooped. Noah grabbed his mom's waist and squeezed tightly. "Does this mean we're a real family now?" Matthew knelt beside them. "You've always been a real family, but now, the world knows it too." Later that night, as the boys fell asleep to the sound of soft guitar strings playing in the background, Natalie sat at the kitchen table with a folder in front of her. She had a faraway look in her eyes. Matthew joined her, pouring 2 cups of tea. "What's that?" She hesitated, then pushed the folder toward him. "Something I wrote. A long time ago, before all of this." He opened it and found a letter, dated years ago, Matthew. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't have the strength to tell you everything face to face. I loved you, I still do, but life, it got in the way. Your world didn't have room for me back then, and I couldn't let that rejection touch our sons. They deserve better. They deserve someone who chooses them, even when it's hard. If you ever come back, not for me, but for them, then maybe there's hope. Maybe we weren't broken, just paused. I'll always believe in second chances. I hope you will too. Natalie." He stared at the letter, heart pounding. His voice came out low and rough. "You wrote this years ago?" She nodded. "I almost mailed it, but I kept it instead. I guess part of me hoped you'd show up on your own." He took her hand gently. "I'm sorry I didn't." Her eyes softened. "You're here now." The next morning, Matthew brought the boys to his office for the first time. It wasn't just a visit. It was a beginning. They walked through the tall glass doors of the Grant Sound Studios, the receptionist doing a double-take as the boys skipped past. Matthew showed them the recording rooms, the mixing boards, the live stage. "This is where stories become songs," he said. Leo looked around in awe. "Can we make one here?" Matthew smiled. "That's the plan." Noah pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "I brought new lyrics." The staff gathered, intrigued. It wasn't every day the CEO brought in young guests. Matthew spoke up. "Everyone, meet Leo and Noah, my sons." A beat of silence, then warm smiles, applause. Later, as the twins recorded their first rough demo in Studio A, Matthew stood behind the sound engineer, arms folded, eyes glassy. Natalie arrived just in time to hear the chorus, Leo's voice steady, Noah's lyrics honest and raw. She whispered to Matthew, "They sound like they've been doing this forever." "They sound like they were born for this," he replied. After the session, the boys ran out, energized. "Can we do it again tomorrow?" Leo asked, breathless. Matthew knelt down. "We'll do it as many times as you want." Then Noah, quieter, looked up. "Will Mom still be there too?" Matthew looked at Natalie. She smiled. "Every step of the way." The moment felt simple, but it wasn't. It was everything. No longer a broken past, no longer a disconnected future. Just a family, right here, right now. And, in the echo of that studio, with the laughter bouncing off the walls, the next chapter had already begun. It was supposed to be just a normal Sunday. Blue skies, warm breeze, and a plan for brunch at Natalie's favorite cafe, one she hadn't been to in years. But as they stepped out of the restaurant, hand in hand with the boys racing ahead on the sidewalk, everything shifted. A voice called out from across the street. "Natalie?" She turned instinctively. Her expression froze. Matthew noticed it immediately. A tall man in his late 50s approached, flanked by a woman dressed in polished neutrals. Their pace was fast, purposeful. The boys stopped and looked back, sensing the tension. The woman spoke first, her tone controlled but unmistakably cold. "So, this is where you've been hiding." Natalie instinctively stepped in front of the boys. "I'm not hiding. I've been living, quietly." The man narrowed his eyes. "With him?" His gaze shifted to Matthew. "I suppose this is the part where you pretend none of this is about money." Matthew extended a hand calmly. "I'm Matthew Grant, and you are?" "Her parents," the woman snapped. "Or at least we were, until she decided to raise children in secret and cut off everyone who ever cared." Natalie's jaw clenched. You didn't care. You disapproved of everything. You called my pregnancy a mistake. You threatened to disown me. We did disown you, the man said, without a hint of shame. And now you're standing next to a CEO worth millions. That explains the sudden interest in reconnecting. Matthew stepped forward. Let's be clear. I'm here for my children, not for some power play. The woman's voice rose. Your children? You weren't even there. Natalie raised them alone. We have every right to intervene. Noah clutched Natalie's hand. Who are they? She knelt down slowly. They're your grandparents. But we don't have the kind of relationship where we hug when we meet. Leo looked up at Matthew. Are they going to take us away? Matthew's heart dropped. He crouched beside the boys, looking them both in the eyes. No one's taking you anywhere, I promise. But promises don't stop legal threats. The next day, a formal letter arrived, a petition for custody review. Natalie's parents were challenging their right to raise the boys, claiming Natalie's illness made her unfit, and Matthew's recent involvement was a PR stunt. Natalie broke down in quiet, exhausted sobs. I thought we were past this, she said, barely above a whisper. I thought we were safe. Matthew knelt beside her, gripping her hand. They're not going to win. We've built something real. No judge will take that away. But they have money, she said, voice shaking. Connections. They know how to play the system. So do I, Matthew said softly, and I have something they don't. What's that? He touched her hand gently. The truth. They met with the legal team that same afternoon. Matthew refused to let it turn into a smear campaign. We lead with character, with care. Let the court see who these boys really belong with. As preparations began, the twins overheard more than they should have. At bedtime, Leo asked, Do we have to go live with those people, Ma? Matthew sat between their beds. No, buddy, you're not going anywhere. But they're family too, right? Noah whispered. He hesitated, then answered honestly. They're blood, but real family. That's the people who stay, who show up, who fight for you. The next few days were a blur of statements, letters, depositions. Natalie, frail but fiery, sat for hours explaining her story, how she raised two boys with nothing but her voice, her strength, and a whole lot of heart. The boys were interviewed too, with counselors present. Leo's words were clear. I want to stay with my mom and dad. I didn't even know I had a dad until a few months ago, but he's been there every day since. That counts. Noah, more reserved, simply said, They love us. That's enough, isn't it? Matthew sat quietly outside the rooms where their words were recorded, hands clasped tightly, breath held longer than he realized. On the final evening before the hearing, Natalie pulled a dusty photo album from a box beneath the bed. The cover was cracked, the corners worn. She opened it with care and turned the pages slowly. Baby pictures, school projects, drawings, notes. This is our story, she said. They'll never erase this. Matthew leaned closer. Then let's make sure they never try again. She handed him a photo. It was one he'd never seen. Natalie holding the twins in a hospital bed. Her face was pale but glowing, and written in the corner, barely visible, were the words, You were worth it. He swallowed the lump in his throat and slid the picture into his pocket. Because tomorrow, they would walk into court not with anger, but with love. And love would speak louder than anything money could buy. The courtroom felt colder than it should have. The polished oak walls, the rustle of papers, the clipped heels against tile, it all felt too sterile for what was at stake. Matthew sat on the left side of the room, his fingers interlaced tightly in his lap. Natalie sat beside him, her hands trembling ever so slightly. She hadn't slept much, neither had he. Across from them sat her parents, unmoved, impeccably dressed, their expressions unreadable. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then seated. Natalie's parents' attorney began first. Calm, rehearsed, and sharply clinical. Your Honor, we are here today out of concern. Our clients wish only to ensure the well-being of their grandsons, Leo and Noah, who have been raised without proper financial support, without a stable family network, and now, under the sudden influence of a man who has only recently appeared. He turned toward Matthew. Yes, Mr. Grant is a successful businessman, but fatherhood is not measured in net worth. It is measured in presence, in consistency, in moral foundation. Matthew felt the words sting, but he didn't flinch. He waited. Their side rested after presenting photos, timelines, and shallow narratives of absence and abandonment. No mention of the phone calls Natalie had made, no mention of how she had been pushed away by her own family. Then came their turn. Matthew stood. His voice, calm but firm, filled the room. I didn't know I had sons. And yes, I missed the beginning of their lives, but since the moment I found them, I've done everything in my power to be there. Not with gifts or grand gestures, with time, with meals, with songs, with truth. He glanced at Natalie, then at the boys sitting quietly in the front row. I didn't grow up with much family. I didn't know what fatherhood would feel like, but I know this. When Leo sang that song in the subway, I recognized it, not because it was famous, but because it was written by someone I once loved. A woman who, despite everything, raised two remarkable boys on her own. He turned to the judge. I'm not here to erase the past. I'm here to build a future, with them. If they'll have me. He sat down. The silence that followed felt sacred. Then the judge looked toward the front row. Leo, Noah, would you like to say something? Leo looked at Noah. Noah gave a tiny nod. Leo stood first. His voice wavered for a second, then steadied. I used to sing in the subway because Mom couldn't work much. People gave us quarters. Some gave us smiles. But nobody really listened. Until he did. He pointed to Matthew. He didn't just hear the song, he heard us. Noah stood next. Shy, quiet Noah. He clutched a folded piece of paper and approached the stand. I wrote this for the hearing, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's not long. The judge nodded gently. Go ahead, son. Noah unfolded the paper. It's called Real Family. Real family shows up, even when they're late. Real family holds you, even when you're mad. Real family sings your song, even when they forgot the words. And real family stays, not because they have to, but because they choose to. He folded the paper again and looked up, eyes glassy. I want to stay with my mom, and my dad, both. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Even Natalie's parents looked shaken. The judge cleared her throat softly, her voice warm but decisive. I've heard enough. The testimony of these children speaks volumes. I see a family here, not perfect but deeply committed, and in my courtroom, that matters. She paused. Full custody remains with the mother, with shared parental rights to Mr. Grant. The petition for removal is denied. A collective breath filled the room. Natalie exhaled, a trembling hand over her chest. Matthew wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and the boys rushed forward, burying themselves between them. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered. Questions flew, cameras clicked. Matthew didn't stop to talk. He knelt beside the twins on the courthouse steps and looked them in the eyes. You were brave today. Braver than most grown-ups. Leo grinned. Did we win? Matthew smiled. We didn't just win. We belonged. That night, they returned home to Natalie's apartment. The walls were still cracked, the couch still old, but the laughter filled every corner. Matthew pulled out a sheet of paper, a melody, notes scribbled in pencil. the beginning of something new. "Want to help me finish this song?" he asked. Noah took the paper. "Only if we all get to sing it." "Deal," Matthew said, his voice catching just a little. And, as the stars blinked awake above the city, a new song began to form. Not for the world. For the four of them. For the home they fought for. The sun peeked through the curtains of Natalie's modest apartment, painting warm streaks across the living room floor. The old couch, the chipped coffee table, the clutter of notebooks and music sheets, they all looked different now. Not because they'd changed, but because the people in them had. Matthew stood in the kitchen, carefully flipping pancakes while Noah set the table, humming quietly to himself. Leo bounced into the room with his usual energy, holding a stack of freshly sharpened pencils. "Mom says we're going to start school next week," he beamed. Matthew smiled. "I already talked to the principal. They're excited to meet you two." Natalie walked in slowly, her steps still cautious, her strength returning day by day. She leaned against the doorframe, watching the scene in front of her with soft eyes. "I used to imagine this," she whispered. Matthew turned, spatula in hand. "Breakfast chaos." She chuckled gently. "No. This, you, them, together." He walked over and kissed her forehead tenderly. "Let's stop imagining and just live it now." Later that day, they all rode together to the studio downtown. Not Matthew's corporate headquarters, but a smaller space he'd set aside. A cozy recording room that felt more like a sanctuary than a business. The walls were lined with acoustic panels, guitars, and framed lyrics. In the center stood a piano. "All right," Matthew said, clapping his hands. "We've got work to do." Leo sat at the microphone, headphones slightly oversized on his head. Noah flipped open his notebook, his fingers running along the lyrics they'd written together. Matthew sat at the piano and began to play. The opening chords were slow, heartfelt. When Leo started to sing, the room changed. His voice was no longer just a child's, it was a vessel. And when Noah joined in, reading the second verse, the story became whole. The song wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. Natalie watched from the sound booth, tears quietly slipping down her cheeks. The boys weren't just performing. They were sharing who they were, every note, every word, a part of their journey. When they finished, silence filled the room, the kind of silence that only follows something sacred. Matthew stood and walked into the booth. He wrapped Natalie in his arms and whispered, "We should name the track after her." She blinked, surprised. "Me?" He nodded. "You were the melody before any of us found the lyrics." The song, titled Natalie's Voice, would later become the anthem for a national music therapy initiative, a nonprofit Matthew launched in the boys' names to support children battling illness through the power of song. Months passed. Natalie's treatment continued, bolstered by top specialists and a support system she'd never had before. The boys started school, found friends, and occasionally performed at local charity events, their bond with their father growing deeper with each shared chorus. One chilly afternoon, Matthew sat on the edge of the bed, holding a letter Natalie had written before her surgery. "If you're reading this," the letter began, "then I either didn't make it, or I'm too groggy to say what I need to." Matthew's breath hitched. "You found us, Matthew, and not with your money or your fame. You found us by listening, really listening. You heard their laughter, their fears, their songse. You became the man I always hoped you'd be." He folded the letter against his chest, overcome. But Natalie did wake up. And when she did, the first thing she saw were her boys sleeping in chairs by the window, and Matthew, holding her hand, whispering softly, "I'm still here." By the end of the year, Natalie's voice had gone viral, not because of a marketing campaign, but because someone had uploaded the subway recording, raw and shaky, to social media. The video showed a boy singing his mother's forgotten lyrics while a man stood behind him, tears in his eyes, rediscovering his place in the world. The comments poured in. "Never cried like this from a song before. This is what real love sounds like. Fathers like this restore hope." One morning, Matthew sat down to write something new. Not a business memo, not a press release. A letter to Leo and Noah. He wrote about music, about love, about the moment he first heard their voices, about how every note since had rewritten his life. At the bottom, he wrote, "You didn't just find your dad. You gave him a reason to sing again." He folded it, tucked it into the sleeve of their next record, and waited until they discovered it themselves. Because some truths, like the best songs, aren't shouted, they're whispered and held forever.